Hey everybody, welcome to Midwest Gaming Classic 2022. My name is Brad, and we are Hair of the Dogcast here at the bonus stage.
Yeah, that's right.
I hope everyone's having a good time. To the right here is my buddy Tom.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
But we don't want to talk about Tom.
Oh.
We have a very special guest. You probably know him from Retronauts, from Limited Run Games, from 1UP, from a million things. You're a popular guy.
It's like a dozen things, probably.
Like a dozen things.
My name has appeared various places. I'm shameless that way.
Yeah, I wish my name appeared as half as many places as yours
We're not
does.
even counting the bathroom stalls. So don't even want to talk about that.
Jeremy Parish, thanks so much for joining us today, Jeremy.
Woohoo! You're welcome.
Yeah, and today we are going to have a discussion on video games in 1986.
I thought there was going to be more preamble about like why we're talking about 1986. I don't really know.
Well, I was released 2 years after 1986, so I did some research ahead of time, and
I wasn't even alive?
No, I was an 88 boy.
Oh my God, why are you even here? Let the adults talk.
Yeah, I played some of the games, though. I actually played quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
I was surprised to see how many big games came out, so we were just kind of shooting some topic ideas around, and I said we could do a golden years of gaming if you have a specific year that you wanted to talk about.
Right.
And you said 86 very confidently, and I'm sure you have many reasons why you know that.
You killed off a few obvious choices. Said you already talked about those.
Yeah.
And that's fine because it made me stop and think like, what's really kind of a foundational year for video games? And I really feel 1986 was the year that video games, as we know it now, really, really kind of came into focus. I mean, obviously they existed before that, but when you look back at 1986, there are several console releases and a whole bunch of game releases that still, those are still active properties and concerns going today. And just so much of kind of the things we take for granted were sort of codified in 1986.
Some of the biggest franchises in gaming history born that year.
Right, yeah.
Howard the Duck 2 came out that year.
Atlantis No Nazo.
Yeah.
Everyone loves that one. It almost came to America as Super Pitfall 2, but then I think everyone got cold feet and came to their senses.
Yeah.
So we lucked out.
Yeah, 86. The Nintendo had landed in America the year, like a couple months before 86 started. Was very popular, and I know the SG-1000 was bouncing around.
Not really. So the NES, you're right, kind of debuted in a soft launch just in like New York City in October 1985. But 1986 was the year where Nintendo was like, oh, okay, cool, this is going to be successful. And retailers said, whoa, that did really well in New York. We wanted in on that.
That was
so
the
NES
robot test,
yes,
right?
Yeah, the test with, Howard Phillips out there in a bow tie and a robot saying like, look at what I can do if
I'm a Nintendo.
The stars align. But in 1986, the NES went nationwide and, really spread out. And by the end of the year, you could buy it, if you could find it anywhere in the country. And the library started to kind of diversify a lot. And you had that in terms of the Nintendo side of things. On the Sega side of things, the SG-1000 was really getting phased out in Japan in favor of the Mark III. But then the Mark III's counterpart, the Master System, launched in America and really kind of put Sega on the map in terms of, hey, here's a company that, is not just about cool arcade games, but they also make console games. And at the same time, you had Sega making really cool arcade games like Outrun debuted that year.
Yeah.
So, everyone was kind of firing on all cylinders. Even Atari came back. The fun is back, they said, with the new budget-priced version of the 2600, but also the 7800, which was kind of the 2600, but like 3 times as many. It's weird.
Wasn't the 7800 ready a couple years before, and the release got real staggered?
Yeah, so the Atari 7800 was supposed to have launched in 1984, and the market in the U.S. collapsed until Nintendo kind of brought it back, and then Nintendo brought it back. And Atari was like, hey, guess what? We've got in a warehouse just sitting around collecting dust. So they rolled out the 7800 and had a bunch of games that had been prepped, very familiar games, but better than you had seen on Atari 2600. So they rolled those out, and it was kind of not an impressive launch, but it was still a pretty good little system. And those are some pretty good versions of games like Xevious and Robotron 2084 and Asteroids, kind of classic arcade games that felt a little dated in 1986. But, for those who were like, I don't know about this company from Japan, Nintendo, there was this comforting American presence at retail again that you could feel good about.
So it seemed like Nintendo was kind of throwing a few different things at the wall as to try and how to market in America at this time. We have a robot. We're not sure what our big game is going to be. What do you think was the real turning point? What made Nintendo was it Rob the Robot having a good showing? What made it into everyone's homes?
No, I think the reason the NES succeeded here is because people still liked video games and wanted to play video games, but the home console market had been so mismanaged that it just collapsed. Like the bottom fell out from under it. And it was retail that said, we don't want anything to do with video games anymore because they're poison. Like we lost so much money in 1983, 84, we're done. And so Nintendo's mission basically was to say, hey, no, video games are good. These are better games than you had before. We're going to manage things better. We're going to keep the market from being glutted. Yes, the seal of quality.
You knew there was nothing wrong with that game.
And you had Howard Phillips saying that game is not good enough for America. Eventually, they kind of backed off on that. But in the beginning, yes, it was a really good proposition. And all the kids who wanted to play video games but couldn't because they weren't on the market said, that's it, I want that. And retailers said, oh, okay, yes, we'll take another shot. But really, Nintendo just came into a vacuum and had the right technique and the right strategies and the right software to kind of catch people's attention and turn things around. So by the following generation, their market share had gone from like 90% to 50%. But at the time of the NES launch, they basically had the field open to themselves, and Sega and Atari kind of came in afterwards and said, "Whoa, we want in on this too."
I mean, to this day, my mom will refer to any video game console of any time as a Nintendo. So that's how indelible they are. Yeah.
And Nintendo was also innovating on the Japanese side. In 1986, they launched the Famicom Disk System, which was an expansion for the Japanese equivalent to the NES, and a bunch of really, really big series debuted on the disk system. Oh yeah, you've got a little Disc-Coon, the mascot right there. Yep. So that was kind of a big deal. Let's see, was there anything else? No, those were the kind of the big systems for that year. But you had Nintendo, Sega, Atari, kind of the big powerhouses, all putting out new hardware that year in every territory.
What do you think made Sega not have as strong of a showing when it landed? Atari, I think it's fairly obvious what was going on there, but Sega, I know you've been doing your Sega series as Segaiden, and I've been following Famicom conversations and learning a lot about the SG-1000. What do you think made them like stutter out of the gates anyways?
So Sega's big error, I think, was teaming up with the toy company Tonka to distribute the system in the U.S., and Tonka didn't really get the U.S. games market.
I've never heard this. This is interesting. I didn't know they teamed up with Tonka.
I haven't. It's been a while since I've read about this, but I'm pretty sure that right out of the gates,
you're right.
They were like, let's team up with Tonka because they've got a presence in the U.S. Sega was just a hardware company.
Huge.
Yeah. We're just gonna roll up to the stores with a bunch of Sega games in the back of a little toy dump truck and just dump it out, and people are going to love it. No, they just, they kind of came in late to the game. Nintendo had already managed to get its feelers out, and spread across the country by the point the Master System launched. And yeah, the toy company just didn't really have a good strategy for it. And, you look back at kind of the early days of the American home games market, and you had toy companies like Coleco and Mattel, and they all tried and they all kind of failed. And I think it was just the inevitable fate there. Sure. Eventually, Sega did take back the Master System from Tonka and distribute it themselves in the U.S. But by that point, it was too little, too late, and they just kind of cut their losses and went on to Genesis, which did very well for them. But outside of the U.S., the Master System did actually very well. Japan, the U.S. Master System didn't really do too much. But you look at Europe, you look at South America,
South America's huge.
And you can still buy Master System hardware and games in South America at retail. It's not a retro thing. You don't have to go to this convention to get Master System games. You go to their equivalent of, I don't know, Target. And there you go.
Yep.
And there's a few reasons for that. I'm not exactly sure why Europe loved Master System so much. Maybe because of all the racing games. But I know in South America there were some embargoes. Basically, to operate in South America, you had to have, especially Brazil, you had to have a local company, like a locally owned company, handling it. And so Sega
Didn't manufacturing also have to occur in
something like that? Yeah. So it was
or
very
outrageous import prices.
Right. It basically, like you could import stuff, but Nintendo software was crazy expensive compared to Sega software because Sega manufactured in South America, and so they had the field to themselves there.
Yeah.
And it just became entrenched. So, it's just kind of about being at the right place at the right time. So that was kind of the story of hardware for 1986. But, hardware is just a vessel. It's like, the bread and the video games are the filling for the actual sandwich. Like, it's just, the console's just there to get it to your mouth, basically.
One more question about consoles being the bread that comes to my mouth.
The bread.
I don't know a ton about the difference between the Famicom and then the disk system. How much more significant was the power of the disk system compared to the original Famicom?
So the disk system, when it launched, was actually quite a bit more capable than the Famicom itself. So it had the ability to, it ran on diskettes. So the diskettes had more memory storage capacity than cartridges at the time, so the games could be much bigger. It had the ability to, obviously it was magnetic media, so you could write save data and do customization to the disks. And it also had an additional sound channel. Plus, I believe the RAM expansion pack that plugged into the cartridge just allowed you to load more into memory at once. But the thing with the disk system is that it never came to the US because by the time it would have come to the US, it was obsolete because new cartridges came out that had more memory. And they had, the memory mappers so they could load more into memory, just like with the disk system. So by the time the US really kind of got all in on Nintendo, cartridges were actually way more capable than the disk system. So it was kind of pointless here. And, you see a lot of games that debuted on disk system in 1986 that came to NES on cartridge and didn't really lose too much in translation. Like Castlevania debuted on the disk system at the end of 1986, and the only thing we lost was the ability to save progress, which, that game's hard. So it would have been nice to be able to just load up and be at Dracula anytime you want. But
I didn't know that they could save progress. That makes me
they can.
a little frustrated.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's only a 6-level game. So if you were like me and you owned it and you didn't own a lot else, you just kept playing it until you could finish it.
Absolutely.
Some games were hit harder by that, like the game Section Z. I don't know if you know that.
I've heard of it, never played it.
It's a very complex maze game, kind of like if Metroid were a shooter. Like a linear, it's great, but it's really hard and it's really big and confusing. And the thing is, the Japanese version of it, you could save progress after you got to the 3 checkpoints throughout the game, and then just load up from that point with all your your power boosts and everything preserved. Whereas every time you played it in the U.S., you had to start from 0. So it was really hard.
Not even
to
a
beat
password system?
No, nothing.
Oh my gosh.
Nothing. Capcom hate you.
Yeah,
They hate you so much.
They sure did. Gunsmoke. Thanks.
So yeah, that was Gunsmoke also debuted on disk system, but it did not have a save feature for that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, some things were lost in translation to NES. But if you look at The Legend of Zelda, which launched alongside the disk system, the only thing we really lost from that was the extra sound channel, which the sound's actually kind of farty, so I don't think we really lost that much. But it was a big deal that you could save your progress to the diskette, and you could just jump in anytime and have your whole adventure saved to that point. But I actually think we came out better in the U.S. having it on cartridge because they took the time to develop the ability to, enable battery-based saves for cartridges on save RAM. So when you load a game on NES in Zelda, it loads instantly. Whereas in disk system, you put the disc in, you wait for it to load, then you load your game.
Make dinner.
You have to pop the disc out, turn it over, stick it in, and then you can play. So it's like a 3-minute process to get going. Whereas on the NES, you plug in Zelda, you hit start twice, and you're good to go.
Sure.
So it's an interesting kind of transition process, I think. But there were a lot of really, really significant games that debuted on disk system.
Yeah. Was Metroid one of those as well?
It was.
Yes.
It debuted in August, I believe, of '86.
Okay. Yeah.
And they didn't. They kind of they went a little cheap on Metroid when they brought it over and didn't add a battery backup. So they just gave you a password system.
Yeah.
And a lot of tiny characters that look a lot alike.
Horrible.
Yep.
Yes.
And same with Kid Icarus. That also debuted in December.
Yeah.
And also they cheaped out and just gave you the battery or the password instead of the battery. So you win some, you lose some.
Right.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the best-selling video games in Japan of that year, and the number one was Pro Yaku Family Stadium, RBI Baseball.
Yep.
And I was surprised one of the highest-grossing arcade games in Japan was Mahjong, which is interesting that they're...
It still is.
It still is, yeah.
Yeah, so I actually talked about this in a recent video that I did, but I learned from my friend Matt Alt, who's a translator and Japanese pop culture historian, that in 1985, the Japanese government enacted a law that said, kids can't be in arcades after like 6 p.m. because they were afraid that kids loitering in arcades was going to affect their education and cause delinquency. So they got very concerned and they passed this law. So all of a sudden, arcades really became dominated more by adults than by kids. And there'd always been kind of an adult presence in arcades in the U.S. and Japan both, but it became much more kind of top-heavy in terms of age in Japan. So yes, it doesn't surprise me that Mahjong was a hit, because kids were not going to the arcade to play Mahjong, but a guy leaves the office at 9 p.m. and needs to unwind, so he goes to the arcade, he sits there with his cigarettes, maybe has a little bottle of whiskey or something,
Spinning
I don't know, and just hits the little buttons on the Mahjong machines for an hour and calls it a night. It's a way cheaper proposition than going to the pachinko parlor and just cramming coins in and watching the little balls fall and getting nothing for it.
Yeah.
So when these games, Akumajo, Castle Dracula, and Metroid, and Legend of Zelda, when these released, were they instant rave successes in Japan?
I think they did pretty well. I know Metroid was a top 10 seller that year, even though it's not a really big series over there. It did well for itself. Castlevania, I don't think was a huge hit. I think, a lot of those games actually did better here. Actually, maybe all of those games have become more popular in the U.S. and Europe than in Japan, but they did well for themselves.
Did those games push a lot of hardware?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I feel like they offered a pretty good proposition.
At least as far as the disc system, I guess.
Yeah. But at the same time, you also had just on standard Famicom, people were still making cartridge games, and so you had a lot of pretty significant games that came out that year. The biggest of which was Dragon Quest, which came here as Dragon Warrior.
Yep.
And that seems like a game that really should have been on disk system. I don't know why they didn't put it on disk system, but they didn't have battery saves at that point. So when you played the original Dragon Quest, the Japanese Famicom version, whenever you went to talk to the king, he would give you a mantra, a password, and you'd have to plug that in just like with Metroid or Kid Icarus in America, which seems horrible. When they brought that over to the U.S. 3 years later, they sat down and actually had Satoru Iwata from HAL, who would, in the future be Nintendo's president.
Yeah.
He reprogrammed the game. They added new graphics and animation, but also a battery save feature, and they pushed that pretty hard. So we got the definitive version of Dragon Quest, even though it's never been as big here as it was there.
Sure. I couldn't imagine using a password system for that game at all. That's ridiculous.
Terrible. So yeah, those are some big games for the console side of things. But in the arcades, I feel like, we haven't been talking about the arcades yet, but that's where things were really happening.
Super Scalar, baby.
Super Scalar debuted in 1985 with Hang On and Space Harrier, but But yeah, that was a big deal for Sega, was really pushing graphics to the new dimension, like the next dimension, literally into 3D by simulating 3D with the ability to make, just 2D sprites stack up and scale.
Just vomit sprites coming towards you.
If you've played Space Harrier or Outrun or whatever, Afterburner, those games are just like, they really are barfing sprites at you. There's a Hang-On arcade cabinet up in the top floor right now as part of one of the auction games, and it's got the handle bike controllers and everything.
Oh, sure.
And like that was the first of the Super Scalar games, and it's great. But after that, they would get way more dramatic in terms of the stuff they were throwing out in your face. But really, I feel like 1986 was the sweet spot because you got Outrun, and that's really the game that's had the most traction. It's the one that has the strongest gameplay proposition, I think. It's basically a racing game, but the combination of the visual style, with the road just streaking past you, other racers streaking past you. It kind of took the pole position style and made it way more convincing. But
gave you a girlfriend.
It gave you a girlfriend. But it's the vibe of the game. It really is kind of like the definitive Sega game, the Blue Skies gaming.
Absolutely.
Because yes, it's a racing game, but it's not like a high stress racing game. It's actually a really chill racing game where you're in, your Ferrari Testarossa, and your girlfriend is next to you, and you've got the top down, and you're cruising along, the coast, and then through the desert, and it's just like really, really scenic, and you've got this really great kind of sort of smooth music to it. It's
multiple
just a classic.
Radio stations. Man,
I mean, it's there. Wasn't there a dedicated radio station button on the console? I want to say.
I believe
on the control panel. Yeah,
I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a game that took. Yu Suzuki, the designer, it took his love of two things: math and racing
cars,
and specifically racing in Europe, driving just cars, and combined those into this really beautiful experience. And if you have the opportunity to just like get the Outrun soundtrack on vinyl, do it, because it sounds so good even now.
Absolutely.
It's the FM synthesis. And so it's all very synthetic, but it's got kind of this like calypso style to it. It's like imaginary steel drums basically. I just love it. And then combines with the bright red car on the road with the green grass and the blue sky overhead.
Yes, the color scheme was everything just gelled in that game, and that is probably my favorite of the Super Scalar games as well.
I mean, some of the later ones like Galaxy Force 2 were way more impressive just in terms of what they were doing. Thunderblade, but in terms of a game that you can just go stand in front of and chill out, or like if you can find a sit-down cabinet, my God, like do that. Put $1 in, play, because it's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there were a lot of really good arcade games that came out that year. Rampage, Bubble Bobble, Akari Warriors was a big one.
Yeah. Akari Warriors. No, I want to say
that's a trigger word.
Taito was on fire that year because within the space of a month, they put out Arkanoid and Bubble Bobble, two of the all-time greats. And Arkanoid brought back Breakout, which was a decade-old game, and it was kind of like we talked about this yesterday in our panel actually about how it kind of inspired Space Invaders and the shooter genre. But then Arkanoid kind of took it back to its origins and gave you like a really elaborate, fancy, cool version of Breakout, which also is very, very hard. But that is a game that they really love and they keep going back to. And, they always do their best to give you an accurate, faithful simulation of the arcade experience. And so when it came to NES, it came with the paddle controller, dial controller. When it came to DS, you could get a special pack-in version that had a little dial that you could plug into the bottom port, the GBA port of a DS or DS Lite.
That's cool. That's very
They just released the Egret 2 mini arcade like standalone cabinet, and you can get Arkanoid as a special add-on with its own dial controller, like a rotary controller that's really, really good.
Oh, nice.
And also works with stuff like Camel Tree and a few other games. But
Arkanoid is a game, whenever I see it at an arcade, like that's one of the first spots I like to go.
You go play and you're dead within 2 minutes, but you know you had a good time.
Yeah, I'm like...
You can shoot lasers at the bricks. That's great.
I told my fiance, you're going to love it. It's so cool. And she said, no, this doesn't make sense to me. Yeah.
But then on the other hand, Bubble Bobble was... It's weird because the game looks so dated, even in 1986. It's just like these flat black backgrounds, little chubby dinosaur guys spitting bubbles.
Even when that game
so
is
good.
contemporary to me, I wouldn't rent it for that precise fact.
Yeah.
Because just looking at the back of the box art, I'm like, this looks like, what is this? Two little sprite dinosaurs?
I really think that was one of the first games that kind of definitively said, a game doesn't have to push the boundaries of technology and visuals to be really great. And the secret behind Bubble Bobble was that you really needed to play with another player, not only to get the best ending, but also just to have the best experience. Because teaming up with another person to trap monsters in spit bubbles and then blow up the bubbles and turn them into like popsicles and diamonds and whatever. It sounds ridiculous, but it's so good. It's so fun. And there's 100 stages of it. And there's this infinite loop of music that never stops. It just keeps going, and you'll never escape it.
I know.
And it gets into your head.
Like, podcasts won't be invented for another 30 years. My God, what am I going to do?
And I know Fukio Mitsuji, he mentioned one of the reasons that like he wanted to get the game was because there wasn't a lot of games that were appealing to girls at the time. So he created a non-violent experience, which it turns out people all want to play fun games that they don't need to have guns and cars to be great.
I don't know about that.
What's that?
I said I don't know about that, but go ahead. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that really targeted a part of the arcades that were lacking, and it brought everyone together because good games are good games.
Yeah, and then you had Sega kind of splitting the difference between violent games and games with more feminine appeal with Fantasy Zone, which is a shooter that's completely pastel and full of cute little things, but you're blowing them up and then like grabbing money and using it to buy better missiles and stuff.
I love Cute-em-ups. Cute-em-ups are one of my favorite
things.
It's
great. That was kind of the original.
Yeah. Poppin' Twin Bee is one of my favorite franchises.
I think there was a Twin Bee game that came out in 1986 also, but Fantasy Zone was great because it took the idea of Defender, the old game by Williams, that was like super intense and fast and flashy and like had this really stark minimalist style. And they just said, what if we colored everything pink and gave the sun an angry face and had you control a little ship with wings that just flutters around.
It's so cute.
It's adorable. And it's really, really hard.
Yes, that too. Right.
And the sequel is called The Tears of Opa Opa. It's like it's really a mixed message, but it's great. It's also was kind of had a companion piece in a game called Quartet, which was a shooter that Sega made that was designed for 4 people, kind of in the Gauntlet style, which had debuted the year before. So you really saw a lot of iteration on great ideas in arcades, and ultimately arcades were about like trying to make people spend money as fast as possible. Taito did it by just like making Breakout insanely hard, but then also they were like, what if there were a game you could play together with a friend? So 2 people are pumping money in. And Sega said, no, 4 people playing together.
Yes, give me all the yen.
Yeah, you also had games like Wonder Boy, and that same year, Wonder Boy became Adventure Island on Famicom.
Yep.
You had Life Force, another cooperative shooter that came out of Salamander in Japan.
Huge Life Force fan.
Yeah.
But that was like
for the first time when you borrowed your TurboGrafx to me.
Oh yeah. Salamander.
That was Gradius, but also it could be top down, and you could play with another person. Good stuff. And then people were playing video games on computers too. Microsoft Flight Sim came out that year. There were probably some other games, but I'm not really big on computers, so I can't really say.
Well, were you playing it back then, Tom?
No, I did not have a computer. I was playing probably Math Muncher or Number Muncher at school, maybe Oregon Trail. That's about it.
A tough game as well.
Yeah, Apple IIe. So.
Yeah, and there were a lot of companies that got started that year as well. Acclaim, Majesco, Bethesda, Ubisoft. A lot of companies got their start in '86. Seminal year for many big franchises and many big companies.
Yeah, I really feel like that was kind of the jumping off point for video games as being this sort of raw, undefined thing that could have just been a fad and could have gone away, and it seemed like it was going away. But 1986 was the year where people really started to say, how can we take these ideas that have been kicking around for the past decade and really build on them, improve on them? How can we build a functional business around this, an industry? How can we, establish this as something more than just a flash in the pan? And I think, 1986 was really where you started to see everything come together. Mm-hmm. And, in the following years, Nintendo Mania would take off across the US, and, Sega would launch the Genesis, and NEC would bring along the TurboGrafx PC engine, and PC games would get more elaborate, and you'd see, like Lucasfilm Games creating the Scum series with Maniac Mansion. But all of that was kind of like 1986 set the stage for that.
Sure.
So that gets my vote for
Is
one
that
of the
your
great
best?
years.
Would you say that's one of the most, or your most formative year for video games?
You mentioned I took a few of the good ones you mentioned, because 97 I think was a very important year. Mm-hmm. 2007 I'm probably just biased because I like a lot of games that year.
No, it was a great year.
It was a good year.
I would say for me personally, 1988 was the year, because that's when I got my NES at the very beginning of the year, and just freebased it.
And that's when famous podcaster Brad from the Dogcast was born too. 88's a big year. Yeah.
It's just popping off.
The world has never been the same. Also, 86, the year that gave us Elf.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, I mean, coincidence? I
yes.
don't know.
If you had to choose one of the worst years for video games, what comes to mind?
Actually, earlier this year, we did a podcast on looking back at 2002. That might be it.
Yeah.
That was dire. There wasn't a lot of great stuff that happened in 2002. It was kind of like, the PS2 and Xbox and GameCube had all launched, but people were still kind of wrapping their heads around how much more elaborate and complex games had to be to work on those systems. So you got a few classics like, Grand Theft Auto Vice City and Metroid Prime. But for the most part, it was kind of people fumbling around. And then 2003, they'd kind of get their act together, and that generation would take off in earnest. 2002 was rough. It was dark times.
I agree.
Because even when you look back at the American video games crash in the early 80s, mid 80s, like even though the American console market was sucking eggs at that point, that was the only space that great stuff wasn't happening in games. You look at the computer market, you look at Japanese consoles, you look at European PCs, you look at arcades, all of them just bursting with innovation and ideas. And a lot of those things would kind of trickle their way to the console market in America a few years later. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there wasn't really a bad year, I'd say, for video games in the 80s. And the 90s had some checkered times where, at Sega selling like 4 different consoles at the same time, and they were all very confused.
Not the best time for Sega, for sure.
But even then, the transition between 16 and 32 bits was relatively smooth, because 16-bit games, there were some great NES, Super NES and Genesis games that continued well until the point where N64 and PlayStation kind of took off.
Right.
So yeah, I would say 2002.
All right.
Could have just missed it altogether.
Yeah.
Do you have any projects you're working on you're excited about? I know Limited Run just had their store open up this weekend, which looks beautiful.
Yeah, I didn't go to that because I didn't realize it was going to be this week. I had already committed to this.
Yeah.
So I missed out on the grand opening, but yeah, that seems cool. My main gig at Limited Run now is publishing books, making books happen. And so we've got a lot of those coming. I'm excited about some of the videos that I have coming up personally for my video projects, getting into Sega Master System, actually.
And the books you release, like Super NES Works, all of those are gorgeous books. If you have a chance to get them, definitely grab them, because they are wonderful.
But those aren't the only things we're publishing. We're publishing from other authors, too.
Yeah.
If you know cool people who want to write books, send them my way.
Nice. I'm not a cool person, but I'll try and write something.
Oh, okay. That works, too.
Yeah. And do you have any other questions, Tom?
I think I'm good. Jeremy, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I know you're
absolutely.
a busy guy here.
I have one question from our a friend of ours from the Discord wanted me to ask you if you would sing the One Up Show theme song.
I will not, actually. Sorry, that wasn't my work. I don't feel like I can sing it.
Okay.
Right.
That belongs to other people, so I'll leave it to them. I won't besmirch it.
Brad, take us out, buddy.
Yes, thanks again so much for joining us, Jeremy. Go check out Limited Run Games, check out Retronauts, check out your Patreon, where you can get access to a lot of really cool videos.
Yeah,
and
you can just go to YouTube.
Video game renaissance, man.
Well, also, I mean, access to your books ahead of time, being able to look through those are fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again for joining us. Jeremy Parish, everybody.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Keep it locked in here at the Dogcast, MGC 2022. We got panels going on all day. See you later.